As an iOS developer, I find myself very dependent sometimes on the backend. Sometimes I just want to build a demo project. In a lot of cases, I actually just want to have a local server running on my Mac so I can test certain things. I definitely don't want to build a fully fledged server just locally on my Mac very easily and in Swift, because who wants to leave Swift? In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up a local test server and run it in less than 5 minutes. I am using an Apple internal framework, and we're going to run these as a command line tool in the terminal. So here I started this little fake API server and added here this retry testing. This means that it randomly throws me errors when I load here in the client app the users. So this data is coming from this local server. If I press reload, sometimes it throws this error. This is the error that I actually gave, so unauthorized access. If I stop this and then reload, no, you see a different errors, could not connect to a server. And then we start the server again. You see here, I'm running now locally at the port 8080. If I then press here my app, you see I'm here again getting this data. This is really from this API, which I can also show you when you open a browser. I have an endpoint for users. I get this error sometimes, just need to refresh. And I have these 4 entries, which are the ones that I have here. I can also fetch one user by ID. So now I get the first user with this ID. And I also added his images. So this is then with the endpoint images and then the file name. So I get this image. As you see, I'm just running here locally. Let's now jump into code. We are starting with the local server and then how to integrate this with the iOS client afterwards. I will use the terminal since we are already working so much in the terminal. We just open the terminal app. You can use the Spotlight search and use terminal. Then you want to go in the folder where you want to create this project, CD for current directory, and then drop in from Finder, use the location you want to have, and then drop this in. And I can make a new directory for our API. So this is make directory fake API server. Then we're going into this directory, so CD, and we're going to create a Swift package with Swift package init -- type executable. Okay, let's now open the package.swift file. This is the launching Xcode. I have this one main.swift file. This is because it's when I want to run this in the terminal. This is the file during the build and the run. Xcode will look for this file. To better organize, we need to add one more folder here. So this is a new folder with the same name as my package. So this is fake API server. And in this one, the main file should be in. Okay. So now we are in this and we can test this. I have here one print statement for print hello world. So if you run Swift run, it will then look for this main.swift file. We're getting this one print statement hello world. Okay, next, the important stuff is I want to run a server here. I'm going to use a third-party library to make it easier. We need to declare this dependency in the package file. We have the name, the target, and we need to add here a dependency for the package from URL and from, so this is the version. So the URL string in this case is just going to copy this in GitHub repository for Swifter. This helps us start our server. The version I'm going to use is 1.5. Then in the executable target, I also need to use these to bundle together. So here, need to also add this for product, the name of this package, which is Swifter, with a capital S, and then the package itself is then the Swifter. So this is then this name. Okay, now I'm ready to use this in my main.swift file. So first, just importing foundation and the Swifter package. This lets me then create a server, HTTP server. Then you can specify routes, like we want to have a route for users. This is a GET request. In this trailing code, you get the request, which I'm not using right now. I'm just going to return here a JSON with an array for ID of 1 and name of Alice. And then let's just add another one with ID 2. This is just so you get a first working example. For the server endpoint, you need to return a response, HTTP response. You see here we can also say bad request, forbidden, internal server error. This is nice to practice what can go wrong on the server just to get a better understanding of what's on the other side. But we want to just say everything is fine. So this would be status code of 200, and I want to give here a JSON, and this is this JSON. This would be then a data. So this is we can also use text, and I'm just going to use the JSON file. Okay, so now when we hit this endpoint, everything should work. I need to actually start my server. You can, for example, here specify the port, like 808. This is a throwing function. So we do a do catch block. Otherwise, I print here an error. Now I want to keep this alive, so we're going to use run loop. I want this to continuously run. Okay, this is now set up correctly. And let's test this. So we are still in this folder from my terminal package, and I can use Swift run again. This might be a little bit tricky because we just added these packages. So you see we are not in the normal line, we're still running here. So if you go open Safari or browser, and we are using the URL for our local server is HTTP localhost and then 808, and the endpoint was users. You see now I get here the JSON from my two little entries. As you see, we're able to run this little server with less than 30 lines of code. This is pretty convenient. This HTTP server you can extend for put delete requests. You can add here multiple endpoints. Inside here you have the request, so you can get the method, the path, address, body, headers, parameters, query parameters. You could use this for simulating paging or searches for users with a certain name. There's quite a bit of convenience in there that makes it rather quickly for building stuff. Before we move on, I just want to give you a couple of things that are important. So in order to stop my server here, you can press Ctrl+C and then just run Swift run again. In case something goes wrong, you can use Swift package clean because sometimes it's issues. This is mostly with Xcode, with the package resolved issues, something, yeah, it's an Xcode problem. Sometimes you just need to clean. So, and now you can try Swift run again with a fresh start. It will do everything from the beginning again, but sometimes it's necessary because Xcode. Working with Swift packages is, let's just call it an adventure. Sometimes it works and a lot of the times it doesn't, and then you spend hours. I try to do some more advanced stuff with multiple packages. It's a struggle, but as you see, once it's running, there is a solution. You can get there. This was the first part where I built a little server here, and we're going to now go into Xcode again to create an iOS client. So I'm just, for now, I just leave this running. It's not doing that much. In Xcode, we create a new project for the client. So this is an iOS app. This is my fake API client. It doesn't really matter where you store this because it related, maybe you put it close to the client, but they're independent because for my iOS app, I'm only going to reference the server URL, which was this localhost 8000. For my tiny example, I'm going to just create a file for the model. This is the user. So I have a struct user identifiable and codable. You saw I used two properties, an ID, which is an int, and a name, which is a string. Then I'm going to create a view model just so we have the networking code separate. This is the user view model. Import foundation and use the observation features. This is the observable macro for class user view model. The main property is a var users, which is an array of users, starting with an empty one because we want to load this from the local server. I have one function which is fetch users. This is async, doesn't return anything. The URL that I want to use is the URL. So we have the HTTP. This is not PS, but this is anyway for testing purposes. So let's not go too much into server details. Else, I'm going to print here just for me to remember this invalid URL and return. And I obviously, because this can fail, I use here guard else. Now that I have a URL at this point, I can use URL session shared data from URL. I'm going to use for this, already set it async, so async await. So this is a async throwing function. So we start with do. So this is let users try await. If I have an error, for now, just going to print here failed fetching users, this error. So now I am loading the data from my local host, and actually this is not the users yet, it's just the data and the response, which I'm going to ignore for now. Once I have the data, I can use the JSON decoder, because we made these users decodable, to decode from type, and the type that I have in there is an array of users. If everything goes well, my users. So then I'm assigning this to this users array. Okay, nice. And wanted to just now use this in my content view. So here I use state private var user view model. Then in this view, I'm going to show the list of the user view models users. So I get the user, and let's just add the text for the user here. Now you won't see anything because we actually never called the fetch function, which is async. I'm going to call this when this view appears or when it's shown with the task modifier, where I can call the user view models fetch users. I am here getting something off. So it tells me unexpected character I in line 2, column 5. Okay, the reason why this is not at all correctly formatted is because this also need to be in quotation marks. So the ID and the name. So now we should have everything working. I stop my server again and I run again. Okay, then in my Xcode project, we run, and now you see there's actually data there, which is these two entries that I had here for Alice and Bob. So yay! I managed to get proper JSON going. This is, I guess, such a mistake for front-end developers, because you never really have to write JSON, you just get it from somewhere. Ideally, in the server project, you would just drop in JSON files in this, and then load them from the JSON, not like me, hard code this here every time. Although one could say that working and creating your own little server helps you learn a lot about the backend. Okay, we have this little view going, and I want to do a couple more things. First, maybe don't use this list and vstack, and we put in a navigation stack so that I have a place for button for reloading. Here, if you wanted to call fetch users, it's complaining because this is an async function and I'm not in an async environment. So we are creating one with the task, and I have to still use await. So I can press this here now multiple times. You don't see anything. Let's now go a little bit further. Because we have now a server, let's take advantage of this. For example, I would want to add a delay. So we see the loading indicators. You might want to see different errors that come from the server. Going to the server file. Where can we do this? First of all, here, instead of returning this JSON, we can return an internal server array, for example. Okay, now back in the terminal, I stop and run this again. It's giving me a lot of errors, but this is just because here I never used this JSON property. It's not a problem. It's just sometimes confusing. In the iOS client, if we go to the preview, you don't see anything, and from the console we get a JSON. The given data was not valid JSON, and the reason is it's not a problem with the decoding. For example, if you go in the browser again and you try to do this again, you see nothing, it's blank. It's because we are returning the error and not the actual data, and it doesn't know about this. The way you should handle this is I here try to load the data from this URL and I ignore the response. So we need to handle the response here. And in this case, I need to check what is in this response. This is a URL response, but I want to have a HTTP URL response because I get more information there. So first we need to typecast this. So this is guard let HTTP response. Our response is a HTTP URL response. Let's print no HTTP response. We need to in a minute check what we are doing with these errors. Then now that I have the HTTP response, I can access the status code. Usually it's 200. This is, for example, when I send the JSON, then it's okay. The range that is okay is between 200 and 300. We are going to add another guard statement where I use a range of 200 under 300, and then if our status code is contained in this range, then everything is okay. Else, we again here returning and print HTTP response status code not okay. And I show here the status code. In this case, I'm not going to this point of decoding, so hopefully we get something more useful. If I go back to my content view, and you see here I get the HTTP response status code 500 not. This is because I did for my server this internal server error. Now, most of the times they don't just send something like this, they want to give more information. Ideally, probably from your real server, from the staging or production server, they will send you a specific code and a specific message so you understand what went wrong. So I'm just going to give you the helper function that can format this. So in this case, you return a HTTP response with raw. This is the code for whatever you want. And then inside, you are sending more descriptive error information as a JSON. So you see here, it's an error with the message. Then I am returning this here. For example, 404 users not found. And to make this just a little bit more tester friendly, so I don't need to have to switch again and again, I'm going to add a toggle that randomly gives me a proper response or an error. So this is let should fail. And I am going to say bool random. So now it's randomly false and true, and so we can say if should fail, else. So in one case, I'm returning this error. You can also just randomly pick one of your errors. Now the other thing that I'm going to do now, because I just don't want to run this server all the time, is I'm going to introduce a delay. So we can say sleep 2, simulating a delay of 2 seconds. Okay, now we have a rather slow server. Then go back to my terminal, cancel this, and then run the server again. Okay, we are going back to the client app in my content view. So now when you press reload, it randomly gives you good and bad responses here. I don't update my UI at all. I don't show the loading states and I don't show the errors. So this is the next thing we should think about. Now that we have a nice test server that gives us all these states with not a lot of effort. So I go back to my view model. So you see, I have print statements. I don't track when I start loading. we have 3 different states when I don't do anything, when I have an error, and when I'm fetching. Since we have 3 cases, I use enum fetcher state with the idle, loading, and error. Here in this case, you could just pass the error specific types, but let's keep it simple and use a string. Okay, then I need to declare a state property that I can use in my UI that is connected. So this is the state. This is the fetcher state. Idle, we're starting idle. We don't do anything. Then let's have a look at this pretty little fetcher function. So when I call in here, I want to change my state to loading. Now every time I have a print statement, that means that I had an error. So we can change the state to error and then just show these. Working on this is another topic. It's just that I want to have at least something in my UI. Then I do the same here for this no HTTP response. And then when I have here an error from these responses, but now here, after I fetched my errors, after I fetched my users, I know everything is fine. So here I can go back to idle. Then in the catch error state, I can again do the same. I am just using this error message. Now let's just try to connect everything and use this state for my fetcher. So in content view, I have here this list. The list is only I only want to show this list in the idle state and everything is okay. I need to add here this reload button to all. So I'm just going to use a group, one view, but I don't want to introduce too much complexity right now. So the user view models state, we have 3 cases: idle, loading, and error with the error message. In case of idle, I definitely want to use my list. And in the loading state, I want to have a progress view. Just make this a little bit bigger. So you see the loading indicator, and then my list is coming up. We said 2 seconds of delay. You can reduce this if you don't want to do this. So now when I press the reload, you go back to the loading indicator, and then you see, now we have this one status code of 404, not okay. Now, this is nice, we can test everything, and I can improve my error messages. So here, in case my status code is not okay, I know that from the server. In this case, I'm actually sending in the body of these response more information. So this is the message I actually want to have. We see here the format, so I can create another struct to decode this nicely. We just have one property error with the message. I create a server error with this one error string. This just needs to be decodable. That now that I am here, I know I should look into this. In this case, I'm just doing question mark because we are now otherwise having error for decoding the error. So I am using again a JSON decoder to decode. The type was just the server error self from the data. If let error, and I can use the error message for my state just to have it more descriptive. And else, if I cannot do this, I'm just returning here. So let's see if I get the information from the server, users not found. So I go back to my content view. It's loading there slowly, and you see users not found. Just going to zoom in to highlight. So indeed, we get now the much more descriptive information from the server. The nice thing about this exercise is that you understand a little bit better about the APIs because you actually have to write this code and see what you can actually do. So with this iOS client, you see how they are connected and working together. Some of the requirements for working on the client are a little different. For example, I could now use this logic to implement a retry mechanism so that I'm just fetching again if it fails for certain errors. You can do a lot more advanced things of just testing different flows, errors, delays. You can also do put requests. You can also use this for images. I don't want to put this in this project, but you can obviously, just showing you the other sample. Here for these images, I can use the URL. So the user's image is sent with the JSON that I then can use to generate the full URL. So this would be then the endpoint that I defined, depending on how you set this. I know it's confusing, that's why I don't want to give you this, because it's a little bit more involved. If you want to continuously use this, for example, with dependency injection for different base URLs, although it's similar to if you work in a production environment, usually you have a new sprint. Using the word sprint is not so much fun because it's not so much fun working with sprint. It's just optimizing the fun out of development. Usually at the beginning of the sprint, you don't have a backend yet that has the data. The senior developer needs to implement the networking and mock services, and you switch to the staging environment and pray that everything works. Once that is okay, then it goes to production. So a lot of the times you would need to deal with switching between local tests, mocks, staging, and then checking on production. In this case, I'm just adding another one. You would have mocks in your iOS project, the mock server, the staging server, and then the real server. You can get the demo projects for this in the link in the description. I don't give you the other one because it's very messy. I need to decide what I want to do with this. Definitely in the future, I'm going to use this to practice by myself. But it's also nice when I want to show you stuff about MVVM or more navigation flows, the server and where you navigate in your app, like a checkout flow or login flows or token authentication. All of this is much easier just to test with a local server. Let me know if you're interested in learning how to set up these servers. This could go in the direction of, if you have the design for your front end from the sprint, from your project manager, from your designer, you have just these screens and you need to decide on the API contracts. What APIs you want to have, what should they return, what JSON format should be there. So in this case, we could use this local server to implement it and practice the whole flow of starting from the screen, defining the endpoints, writing the endpoints, and then implementing this client app to see how the whole flow works together. This is a little bit more senior, but I thought this would be more interesting because most of the times you just like consuming REST APIs in this kind of tutorials, which is not really the way you work in a work environment for a production app in a team. It's more the inverse. Things change and you need to be very nice to your backend developers so they update stuff for you. I used to work for 1 year in 21-22 for a app agency in Germany remotely. And it was very grounding just to know, because you actually see the working processes, which is actually different to what I show you sometimes in the tutorials. Just let me know if you want to more see about these kind of processes. I did not work as the senior engineer. I was one of the front-end developers, mostly working on the UI. Although in this team there was 6 developers, 3 for iOS and 3 for Android. So in a smaller team, you get more into, you see more what's going on in the back end. You will see more different parts of the apps. Let me know in the comments what you want to see, what problems you had, so we can also go for more advanced discussions. The whole tutorial was longer, but this is mostly because I wanted to show you some advanced things like the errors or the loading, how to tinker a little bit more with the server. The basic server setup, as you saw, was really quickly. There's not a lot of code involved. Thank you for watching. Until next time, happy coding.